So our next storyteller is Lee Reeves.
Is this good? You can hear me? Okay, so I'm in my late 20s. I live in Michigan, right about here. Closer. Is this better? All right. Okay, I'll stay right here. I live in Michigan, right here. The maples are ablaze with gold and red. It's my favorite time of year. And I have fallen in love with a brand new, dark-haired, black, dark-eyed, 2-week-old baby girl. Now, we took her home from the hospital a little less than a week, and my mother-in-law and I were spending all our free time just basking in the glow of a new baby. And we were just getting to know this new little being that came into our life. But before we left the hospital, the discharging physician was letting us go, and I'd noticed there was a little pink around her umbilicus. That's your belly button. And I said, "Is that okay?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, it's just probably irritation from her sheets. It's all good." So my mother-in-law, Hallie, and I are bathing our new baby, Lita, and we're in the kitchen sink, and the morning sun is just pouring in. And I noticed that pink is getting darker. And my mother-in-law looks very worried, and she tells me I should call a doctor, which really surprises me because she's a Christian Scientist. She's never been to a doctor as far as I know, and she doesn't tell people to go to doctors. So I did exactly what she said and called the office. And the nurse said, "You know, you're a new mother. I think you're probably being overly vigilant. It's probably from the detergent. But if it makes you feel any better, take a ballpoint pen, draw it around the perimeter of the pink area, and if it gets worse, you can just call me back." So the next day, when we're changing Lita, we look, and it not only has it bypassed the perimeter, there's like little sharp, it looks like flames, and the area has gotten swollen around the umbilicus. Of course, I'm thinking some nice cream is going to fix this, some ointment. So I call the doctor's office, and this time the nurse says, "We've seen our last patient. If you can be here in 20 minutes, we'll see the baby." So we make it. The doctor lived very close, fortunately. And I'm in the treatment room undoing her little pink snowsuit. And the doctor comes in with a big scowl. He's kind of peeved. He's like, knows that this is probably not very big a deal, and he's irritated, and he just comes in and kind of pushes me aside and starts to peel her clothes off. And when he lifts the undershirt, his face changes radically. His eyes bulge, his mouth drops open, and he is frozen. He says nothing. And there's this terrible silence in the room. Then he turns to me and says, "This baby's sick. Does she have a fever?" I'm like, I never even thought to buy a thermometer. She's going to be a healthy baby. I did everything right, natural childbirth, wonderful diet. And then he said, he asked me if she'd been sleeping a lot. Well, she was 2 weeks old. I think so. And then he said, "You need to take her to the hospital right now. You don't go home, you don't get anything, you take her to the hospital, and they will be waiting for her." So my mother-in-law turns off the engine under the canopy, and I'm holding Lita. We didn't have to use car seats all the time back then. I'm holding her close, and suddenly I'm just overcome with fear. And I do not want to take this baby into the hospital. This was not in the script. And I feel weak, and I feel like scared and cowardly. And what's going through my mind is, I can't do this, I can't do this, I cannot do this. Suddenly, everything went silent. It was like still life, everything, inside the car, outside. and a calm came over me. And I heard a voice that sounded familiar, vaguely familiar. I couldn't really place where I might have heard it before. But it said, "Your attitude is your only power right now. And what you do is going to set the tone for the rest of this child's life. So take that baby and go into the hospital and do what you need to do." I turned to Hallie. She nodded. I got out of the car. And although I'd given birth 2 weeks earlier, I think that was the moment I became a mother. Now, on the 5th floor, they were waiting for us. They whisked us right into the room, and the doctor must have alerted them, and they started asking all the questions about the family. 6 kids, never been in a hospital. I'd never been in a hospital except maybe once to visit someone. And my husband's family, all of it. And then they tell me they're going to have to start an IV, and I'd say, "What's an IV?" I mean, I'm really clueless at this point. And they explain that they are going to have to put in some high-powered antibiotics, poison. I was never even going to give her sugar. And one of the antibiotics might cause her hearing damage, and that she's going to be there between at least 2 weeks. So I'm, of course, just shaken, but that voice, that power, it was, of course, more than a voice. It's like a presence. It was still with me. And the little entourage comes in with a little cart and all the needles, and the bag is hanging up with the fluid in it, and I'm kind of beginning to see this world. And, of course, the doctor says, "Mrs. Reeves, it's time for you to leave." And that voice was still there, and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not leaving." Back then, it was a big deal. You weren't allowed to, you had visiting hours with your children, maybe 2 years, 2 hours a day. And I said, "Mrs. Reeves, you have to leave." The head nurse comes in and says, "Should I call security?" And he looked at her, looked at the baby, looked at me, said, "No. But if you give us any trouble, I will have you removed." Well, I already knew that I wasn't going to give them trouble. In fact, the voice had even told me not only to not give them trouble, that I have to help these people. I need them on my side. So when it came time to start poking her, which they started in her feet, I took and folded my body over hers to hold her down as she was flailing, and they kept, it's really hard to get an IV started in a little baby. So they kept poking and trying, and all of a sudden I decided I need to tell her what's going on, of course, right? She needs to know. So I start talking to her and explaining, they're going to put medicine in your body. It's going to sting. It's going to hurt when they put this needle in. And I explained to her, just like she was an adult, what was going to happen. And all of a sudden she stopped, and our eyes met, and we had this deep moment of connection that I knew we would always have. And they got the IV in after, I don't know how long, they got it in her head, and so they put a little Dixie cup on top of it. They had to shave her pretty hair and put a Dixie cup on it and put the needle in there. And for the next 2.5 weeks, it was the battle with the IV. They just kept coming out, but they had to get this medicine in her because she was nearly septic. And so, unfortunately, it turned out that was not a fluke, that she had a rare blood disease, and she lacked one of her white cells. And because of that, she would be in the hospital 50 more times before she was 5. And that voice, that presence was with us, and that got us through. And whether you call it, it's like that still small voice, or you call it a higher power, or the hand of God, or intuition, whatever, it's there, and I believe it's always available to us. Only usually there's too much noise up here, too much noise out here for us to acknowledge it and feel its presence. But I believe it's always there. And I like to imagine that it was with us before we were born, and that it'll be with us when we move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, so growing up in Michigan, Lee wanted to be either a nun or a veterinarian. Okay, I'm sure there's a connection there. When I asked her what she likes to do in her free time, she said, "What's that?" Her favorite go-to meal is sardines straight out of the can. I don't know about these people. They're just food, and it's like too weird. Yuck. You know? Lee is currently working on a memoir about her daughter, Lita, and who passed away when she was 20 years old. She likes to walk around about town, spend time with her friends, dancing with Community Soul Dance, which takes place right here every Monday night. Plug. And there's some things out on the table there if you want to see that. Every Monday, 7:30, 7 to 9. Thank you. Yeah, 7 to 9. Okay. So on a strictly personal note now, I've known Lee for a few years. Did I hear, uh-oh? In about 4 years in June, my wife passed away. Some of you know that, and some of you don't. But one of the first people that showed up at my door was Lee. Even though her husband passed away the week before my wife did, she still came to see me and help me get through my grief. And knowing her has been a blessing in my life.